The sound of her scream still haunts me. It was sharp, raw, and full of terror. The kind of sound that makes your blood freeze because you know something is terribly wrong. I wasn't there when it happened, but every time I close my eyes, I imagine my wife's face twisted in pain, her hands raised to shield herself as those so-called HOA officers stormed onto our porch and struck her across the cheek. The bruise bloomed like a cruel mark of their arrogance, and when I saw it for the first time, something inside me broke. I had been away on duty too many times, trusted too much that our quiet neighborhood would keep her safe. But I was wrong. And the men who dared to lay a hand on her were about to learn just how wrong they were. My wife, Emily, has always been strong. She held our family together while I served overseas, raising our son and keeping the house full of laughter even when I was thousands of miles away. But that day, she was different. Her voice trembled when she told me what happened. She said they came in pairs, dressed in dark uniforms with fake badges shining on their belts, claiming they were from the HOA Enforcement Committee. They said there were violations on our property, things like the color of our shutters or the length of the grass. Emily tried to explain, tried to reason, but they laughed at her. And when she told them to leave, one of them shoved the door open and stepped inside, uninvited. That's when it happened. That's when his fist connected with her face. She cried when she said those words. Not because of the pain, but because our son had seen it. Our boy, Daniel, just 11 years old, stood frozen in the hallway while his mother was struck by a stranger. He wanted to help, but couldn't move. That night, he had nightmares. Kept waking up, asking if the bad men were coming back. And each time, I held him close, promising they wouldn't dare. But inside me, a storm raged. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a protector, a soldier, a man who had fought battles across oceans. And now, the war had come to my own doorstep. The HOA had been a thorn in our side since the day we moved in. They didn't like that we kept to ourselves, that we didn't bow down to their petty rules or attend their endless meetings. We weren't troublemakers, we just wanted peace. But peace doesn't sit well with people who thrive on control. They sent letters, fines, and threats. We ignored most of it, knowing half of their claims were nonsense. But never not once did I think they would escalate it to violence. Yet here we were, with my wife nursing a black eye and my son afraid to sleep in his own bed. I looked at her, holding an ice pack against her cheek, and I felt guilt pour over me. I should have been here, I whispered. She touched my hand, gently shaking her head. It's not your fault, she said, but her voice cracked. I knew she didn't believe that, not fully. And neither did I. I wanted to call the police immediately, but Emily begged me not to. She said the HOA had friends in town, that some of the local officers brushed off complaints against them before. She was scared they would come back if we stirred the pot too quickly. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't. Scared of them? They should be scared of me. The next morning, I went out to the porch. The air was heavy, the neighborhood eerily quiet, as if the houses themselves had witnessed the cruelty and chosen silence. Across the street, I saw the HOA president, a smug man named Richard, watering his lawn like nothing in the world could touch him. He raised his hand in a mock wave, a smirk tugging at his lips. And I clenched my fists so tightly my knuckles turned white. That was the moment I decided. This wasn't going to be another incident that slipped through the cracks. This wasn't going to be buried under paperwork or brushed aside by people who looked the other way. No, this was going to be personal. Emily didn't like it when I started making calls, but I needed to know who these men were. It didn't take long. Through some of my old connections, I found out they weren't cops at all. Just hired muscle, thugs dressed up to look official, paid off by the HOA board to intimidate families into compliance. They had done this before, but nobody had fought back. Nobody had the training or the fury I carried inside me. That night, while Emily and Daniel slept, I sat alone in the dark living room. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with restraint. I could still hear the echo of her cry, see the bruise on her face, and every fiber of my being screamed for justice. But justice isn't just about fists or fury. It's about timing, precision, making sure when the hammer falls. It doesn't just break the nail, shatters the entire rotten structure holding it in place. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and thought about every mission I'd ever been on. I thought about the discipline drilled into me as a Navy SEAL, and I realized something. This wasn't going to be a fight. It was going to be a war. And by the time I was done, the HOA would regret the day they ever set foot on my porch. I went upstairs, kissed Emily's forehead as she slept, and promised her silently that I'd never let them hurt her again. Then I tucked Daniel back under his blanket, smoothing his hair, and whispered, "Daddy's here now. They can't touch us anymore." But deep down, I knew words weren't enough. The reckoning was coming, and it was going to be brutal. The morning light spilled through the blinds, but our house still felt heavy with fear. Emily tried to smile at breakfast, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate, but Daniel barely touched his food. His eyes darted to the window every few seconds, as if he expected those men to storm back in. It killed me to see my boy look like that, like he'd lost the safety of childhood overnight. I couldn't let him grow up thinking the world was a place where bullies could strike your mother and walk away without consequence. I told Emily I was stepping out for errands, but really, I had a plan in motion. I drove slowly through the neighborhood, memorizing the cars parked outside, the blinds that twitched as people watched me. Word had spread. Neighbors knew something had happened, but fear kept them quiet. Fear was the HOA's weapon. Abide. Learned long ago, fear cuts both ways. I stopped outside a little cafe, just beyond the neighborhood's gates, and met up with someone I trusted. His name was Torres, another former SEAL who had retired a few years back. He owed me nothing, but when I called him and told him what happened, he didn't hesitate. "Send me the names," he said. "I'll dig." Torres was the kind of man who had friends in low and high places, people who didn't mind bending a rule or two when the cause was right. Within hours, I had files on the two thugs who had dared touch my wife. Their names were Brent and Kyle. Both had records assault, intimidation, debt collection scams. They weren't lawmen, not even close. Just bottom feeders looking for a paycheck. They'd been hired by Richard, the HOA president, and funneled money through maintenance fees no one ever saw proof of. When I read those files, I felt my jaw tighten. These weren't ghosts, they were flesh and blood. And flesh and blood could be broken. That evening, when I came home, Emily stood on the porch. Her bruise was darker now, spreading down her cheek like spilled ink. She was watering her flowers with a stiff posture, her eyes narrowing when she saw Richard stroll past with his little dog. He tipped his hat at her, a smug grin plastered on his face. I swear, if I hadn't been holding Daniel's hand, I would have torn across the street right then and there. But this wasn't about rage alone. It was about justice. Real, undeniable justice inside. Emily pulled me aside. "They're laughing at us," she said, her voice trembling. "Richard knows what happened, and he's daring us to fight back. But what if it gets worse? What if they come again?" I cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet my eyes. "Then, I'll be here, and they'll regret it." That night, the sound of a car slowing down outside woke me. I slipped quietly to the window, careful not to wake Emily. A black SUV idled in front of our house. My instincts sharpened, my muscles tense. The driver lingered, then finally rolled away. But I knew what it was: intimidation. They wanted us. Scared, restless, breaking from the inside out. I grabbed my phone and called Torres. "They're circling," I told him. I want eyes everywhere. Already done, he said. I've got some friends running surveillance on those guys. And you're not going to like what we've found. They've been pulling this stunt in other neighborhoods. People too scared to talk. Not anymore, I growled. The following day, I decided to test the waters. I walked right up to Richard's perfect green lawn while he pruned his roses. He looked up, fake friendliness dripping from his voice. Morning, neighbor. I didn't smile. Tell Brent and Kyle to stay off my property. His smirk widened, but his eyes betrayed him for a second, just a flicker of unease. I don't know what you're talking about. Our enforcement officers were just doing their job. Fake badges, fake authority. You crossed a line. I leaned closer, my voice dropping. You think bruising my wife is something you'll walk away from? You don't know me, Richard, but you will. He laughed, a hollow sound, and waved me off. Careful, soldier boy. This is a community. We like rules here. I turned and walked away, but not before letting him see the steel. In my eyes, the kind of look that promised reckoning. That night, Emily sat on the couch with Daniel asleep beside her, his head resting in her lap. She whispered, I don't want you to get in trouble. I just want us safe. I knelt in front of her, holding her hands. Safe doesn't come from hiding. Safe comes from making sure they never touch us again. The next few days blurred into quiet preparation. Torres sent me footage of Brent and Kyle meeting in a dingy bar, flashing cash they didn't earn honestly. He even caught them bragging about teaching some stuck-up woman a lesson. My fists itched at the sight. But the real crack came 2 nights later. I was out in the garage when I heard a sudden thud at the front door. Emily screamed, and I sprinted inside to see Brent himself standing there, grinning like the devil. You didn't get the message, he sneered, stepping closer. But this time, I was home. Before he could take another step, my hand was on his throat, slamming him back against the porch railing. Smirk faltered, eyes wide as he realized I wasn't some scared homeowner. I leaned in close, my voice low and deadly. You hit my wife. You scared my son. That was your last mistake. His hands clawed at my arm, but my grip only tightened. Emily stood behind me, frozen but fierce, watching as I held the man who had hurt her. And in that moment, I swore to her silently. This was only the beginning, because now it wasn't just about revenge. It was about war. The moment my hand tightened around Brent's throat, time seemed to slow. I could feel the pulse hammering. Under my fingers, the weight of every nightmare he'd caused pressing against my chest. My training screamed at me to end it quickly, but another part of me, something darker, more primal, wanted him to suffer, wanted him to feel the fear he had so freely inflicted on my wife. His eyes bulged, his smirk gone, and for the first time, he realized he wasn't in control. I released him just enough for him to gasp for air, but my stare never wavered. You think you can walk into my home, hit my wife, and scare my son? I said through clenched teeth. You think a fake badge makes you untouchable? You don't know who you're dealing with. Emily's voice broke the silence. John, please. Her tone wasn't fear, was something else. She didn't want me to lose myself in violence, even if he deserved it. Her hand touched my arm, grounding me. Pulling me back from the edge, I let Brent drop to the floor of the porch like the trash he was. He coughed and sputtered, clutching his throat, his arrogance slipping with every ragged breath. But then he made the mistake of laughing. You can't touch me, he rasped. Richard's got this whole neighborhood under his thumb. You mess with me, you mess with all of us. I crouched low so my face was inches from his. Good. Then, I know exactly where to aim. He scrambled to his feet, spitting curses as he stumbled off the porch. Emily shut the door and locked it, her hands trembling as she turned to me. Her eyes searched mine, filled with love and fear, all tangled together. What if they come back with more? They will, I said flatly. But next time, we'll be ready. That night, I laid out my plan. I wasn't just going to defend us. I was going to dismantle the HOA from the inside out. Torres had already dug deep into Richard's finances, and what he uncovered was rotten. Richard had been skimming from community funds, pocketing fines, and paying thugs like Brent and Kyle under the table. It wasn't just corruption, it was theft, and I had the proof. But taking him down legally would take time. And while I trusted Torres to gather every scrap of evidence, I needed to send a message now, a warning they couldn't ignore. 2 days later, I parked a block away from the HOA's rented office space. It wasn't much a cheap suite in a strip mall, but it was where Richard held his little meetings of control. Brent and Kyle's car was there too. I slipped around back, moving like I had 100 times on missions overseas. Old habits die hard. Through the window, I saw them. Richard, smug as ever, leaning back in a chair. Brent and Kyle, both nursing beers, laughing about the scared little family they'd put in line. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't rigid with strategy. I recorded every word, every vile, arrogant word. Richard bragging about how he funneled HOA money into his own bank account. Kyle boasting about how he taught that woman not to talk back. Brent calling Emily names that made my stomach twist. When I finally pulled back into my truck, I had enough to bury them, but I wasn't ready to hand it over yet. No, I wanted them to sweat first. The next morning, Richard found an envelope on his porch, no return address, no note, just a USB drive. Inside were the recordings of their meeting. He would hear his own voice, his own laughter, his own bragging. He would know someone was watching. That evening, Emily noticed him pacing his driveway, looking over his shoulder every few seconds. "What did you do?" she asked me softly, suspicion in her voice. Just made him realize he's not untouchable anymore. I said. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to argue, but then her shoulders sagged. I don't want Daniel to grow up in the middle of this. I pulled her close, kissing her forehead. He won't. This ends with me. But the war was far from over. That night, as I tucked Daniel into bed, headlights swept across the window. Another car, slowing, lingering, then pulling away. Emily clutched my hand tightly. "They're not going to stop, are they?" "No," I admitted. "But neither am I." The next day, the HOA called for a special meeting. Flyers showed up on every doorstep, demanding attendance. Richard wanted to reassert his control, to scare the community into silence again. What he didn't know was that I planned to be there too, and I wasn't coming alone. Torres had gathered 3 more men from our old unit, all living nearby, all tired of seeing neighborhoods bullied by people like Richard. They didn't need convincing. They wanted to stand with me when the night of the meeting came. Emily begged me to be careful. Her eyes filled with tears as she held my hand. "Promise me, John. Promise me you won't let them drag you down to their level." Squeezed her hand, my voice steady. "I promise I'll protect this family. It's all that matters." As I walked into that HOA meeting with my brothers at my side, the room went silent. Richard's smirk faltered just slightly. Brent and Kyle stiffened in their seats. And the neighbors, those who had been too scared to speak, looked at us with wide eyes, hope flickering where fear had been. It was time to turn their kingdom of fear into ashes. The HOA meeting smelled of stale coffee and fear. Folding chairs scraped across the linoleum floor as neighbors shifted nervously, clutching the little flyers that had summoned them. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering now and then, as if the room itself was anxious. I walked In with Torres and the two other men from my old unit, Ramirez and Cole, each of them carrying the calm, dangerous presence of men who had seen too much to ever be afraid of people like Richard. The air shifted the second we entered. The kind of silence that comes when prey realizes the predator has arrived. Richard stood at the front of the room, puffed up in his blazer, pretending he was more than just a con man with a title. Brent and Kyle flanked him like dogs on a leash. But I noticed the way their eyes darted toward me, the way their shoulders stiffened. They remembered the porch. They remembered my grip around Brent's throat. And they knew they were outmatched. Neighbors. Richard began, his voice loud but shaky around the edges. We've had some troubling rumors lately. People questioning the authority of this board. I assure you, everything is under control. We only enforce the rules to protect our community. I cut him off, my voice carrying through the room. Every head turned toward me. Is that what you call it when your hired thugs punch women in their own homes? Is that protection? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard's face reddened, his smile faltering. That's nonsense. These accusations are baseless, are they? I asked, pulling a small recorder from my pocket. I pressed play, and the room filled with Richard's voice, slurred with arrogance. I've been pocketing their fees for years, and they're too scared to do a damn thing. Then Kyle's voice, that woman. Huh. I showed her what happens when she mouths off. And Brent's. Her husband won't do a thing. Nobody ever does. The room erupted. Neighbors whispered, shouted, some covering their mouths in shock. Richard lunged toward me, his face pale now, his mask slipping. You can't use that. That's illegal. What's illegal? Torres said coolly from behind me. Is assault, fraud, extortion. His voice was low, deadly calm, the kind of voice that carried authority without needing volume. Richard looked around the room, searching for support, but found none. Even the board members who usually clung to his side avoided his eyes. Emily had insisted on staying home with Daniel, but I wished she could see it the moment the fear cracked, when the neighbors realized they weren't powerless. An older woman in the front row, Mrs. Green, stood up with trembling hands. You fined me $300 because my grandson left his bike on the lawn for 10 minutes, she said, her voice shaking with anger. All while you were stealing from us. Others joined in. Chorus of voices, pent-up frustration, spilling into the air. Years of being silenced breaking free all at once. Richard tried to shout over them, but the tide had turned. That's when Brent, still nursing his bruised ego, snapped. He shoved his chair back and pointed at me. You think this makes you some kind of hero? You don't know who you're messing with? Before I could move, Ramirez was already standing between us, his presence enough to make Brent hesitate. Ramirez leaned in, his tone almost casual. I've been in rooms with men twice your size and twice as dangerous. You're just noise. Brent's bluster deflated in an instant. He sat down hard, muttering under his breath. Richard, desperate now, banged on the table. Enough. I'm still the president of this HOA, and I won't be intimidated. That was when Cole, quiet until now, stepped forward with a folder. He tossed it onto the table in front of Richard. Not anymore. This is everything we found. Bank statements, fake invoices, evidence of fraud. Copies have already been sent to the county prosecutor. Richard's face drained of color. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the papers, scanning. The evidence that tied a noose around his neck. You're finished, I told him, my voice low but clear. You should have thought about that before you laid a hand on my wife. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of the truth pressing down on everyone. Then, slowly, applause began. Not loud, not rowdy, just steady, resolute. Neighbors, standing one by one, clapping, their eyes fixed on me and my team. Not in celebration, but in solidarity. Richard tried one last desperate attempt, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." I stepped closer, leaning down so only he could hear. "I don't regret a thing, but you will." As we left the meeting, the sound of voices rising behind us, I felt a shift in the air. For the first time since this nightmare began, hope wasn't just a fragile wish, was real. But that night, as Emily rested her head against my shoulder, she whispered, "Do you think they'll stop now?" I kissed her hair and held her tighter. Richard might be finished, but men like Brent and Kyle, they don't just walk away. And I was right. Because at 2 a.m, the sound of shattering glass jolted us awake. The crash of shattering glass ripped me from sleep like a gunshot. Emily's gasp echoed beside me as I rolled out of bed, instincts kicking in before thought. My bare feet hit the floor, heart pounding, muscles tensed. Daniel screamed from down the hall, a sound that cut deeper than any battlefield noise I'd ever heard. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed, not because I needed it, but because sometimes it's better to let your enemy underestimate you. Emily clutched my arm as I moved toward the hallway. "John, please don't leave us." Her voice was raw with fear, but I gave her a quick squeeze. "I'm not leaving. Stay behind me." The glass came from downstairs the front window. As we crept down the steps, the faint crunch of shoes on broken shards echoed through the darkness. Then came the low, mocking laugh. "Brent, I told you this wasn't over." His voice slurred with arrogance. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Now we settle this, man to man." I flicked on the hallway light, and there he stood, shoulders hunched, eyes wild. Kyle was beside him, holding a crowbar. Both reeked of alcohol and rage. They weren't here for intimidation anymore. They were here for blood. Emily gasped, pulling. Daniel closed behind her. My boy clutched her nightgown, his small frame trembling. That sight, the fear in my family's eyes, snapped the last thread of restraint I had left. "You picked the wrong house," I said, stepping forward. Brent sneered, brandishing a knife he must have pulled from his belt. "Big, tough seal. Huh, let's see what you are without your buddies backing you up." He lunged, fast, sloppy, fueled by booze and bravado. But I'd fought men in sandstorms, in pitch-black tunnels, with bullets flying over my head. Brent was nothing. I sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted hard. The knife clattered to the floor. My other hand connected with his jaw in a clean, snapping punch. His body hit the wall before sliding down like a broken puppet. Kyle roared, charging at me with the crowbar raised. The metal gleamed under the light, a deadly arc aimed for my skull. Emily screamed. Daniel cried out. But I stepped into him, inside the swing, grabbing the crowbar midair. The impact jarred my arms, but my grip held. My knees slammed into his stomach, the air whooshing out of him. He doubled over, and I yanked the crowbar free before slamming the butt of it across his shoulder. He crashed into the dining table, splinters flying. For a moment, the room was filled with heavy breathing, broken furniture, and the ragged groans of two men who thought they could break me. I dropped the crowbar to the ground with a clang and stood over them. "This is the last warning you'll ever get," I said, my voice low and lethal. "If you ever come near my family again, I won't stop at broken bones." Emily was shaking, holding Daniel tight. My boy buried his face against her, sobbing. Quietly, seeing them like that made my chest ache. This wasn't just about fighting anymore, it was about healing what these men had broken inside my family. I called Torres, my voice steady despite the chaos. "Get here, now." Within 20 minutes, Torres and Ramirez were on my porch, weapons concealed, eyes scanning the street. They looked at the wreckage inside, the bruised, groaning men on the floor, and nodded. "You want us to call the cops?" Ramirez asked. I glanced at Emily. She shook her head quickly, fear flickering in her eyes. The cops? What if they're connected? What if they let them go? She was right. Richard still had strings he could pull. Brent and Kyle slipped. Through the cracks, they'd come back. "No cops," I said firmly. "Not yet. We'll handle this our way." We dragged Brent and Kyle outside, their protests muffled by the duct tape Torres slapped over their mouths. The night air was cold, sharp, almost cleansing. We shoved them into the back of Torres's SUV, their muffled screams vibrating through. The metal dot Emily appeared at the doorway, clutching Daniel in her arms, her eyes locked on mine, wide and uncertain. "John, too? What are you going to do?" I stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm going to make sure they never hurt you again." Her lip trembled. "Promise me you'll come back." I kissed her forehead gently. "Always." As Torres drove us out toward the edge of town, Ramirez sitting in the back with our guests, I stared out at the dark horizon. Every mile we put between us and that broken window felt like a mile closer to justice. These men thought they could terrorize families, thought they could use fear as a weapon. They'd never faced someone who knew fear better than they did, someone who'd learned to turn it into fire. Tonight wasn't about revenge anymore. Tonight was about sending a message loud enough to echo through every corrupt corner of the HOA. And when we pulled into the abandoned quarry on the outskirts of town, I knew exactly how that message would be delivered. The quarry was dead silent. The kind of silence that presses against your skin, heavier than any sound. The moon hung low, casting silver shadows across the jagged walls of stone. Torres killed the engine, and the headlights cut out, plunging us into darkness. Only the faint glow of the moon remained, illuminating the dust that rose as we pulled. Brent and Kyle from the back of the SUV, their muffled grunts echoed. Desperate and angry, but beneath the noise, I heard what I wanted most, fear. We dragged them to the center of the quarry, the dirt crunching under our boots. Ramirez yanked Kyle by the collar and shoved him to his knees, while Torres kept Brent pinned with a forearm across his back. Both men struggled, but they weren't in control anymore. For once, they weren't the hunters. I stood in front of them, letting the silence stretch, letting them feel the weight of what was coming. My chest heaved, not from exhaustion, but from everything boiling inside me, the image of Emily's bruised cheek, the sound of Daniel's cries, the countless nights of dread these men had poured into my family's life. I ripped the tape from Brent's mouth and he immediately spat, "You're insane. You think you can just do this? You'll go to prison." My boot pressed into his chest, forcing him flat against the dirt. "Prison," I hissed. "You should have thought about prison when you put your hands on my wife." Kyle thrashed, the tape still holding his words. "Back." Ramirez ripped it off, and Kyle gasped for air before snarling, "We were just doing a job. It wasn't personal." That snapped something inside me. I crouched down, my face inches from his. "You hit my wife. In front of my son? Don't you dare tell me it wasn't personal." Torres stepped closer, his voice calm but sharp like broken glass. "You boys like scaring families. Like breaking into homes, waving fake badges around. Let me tell you something. You picked the wrong family this time. You picked the wrong man." Brent's voice cracked, fear leaking through. His bravado, "We didn't mean look, Richard paid us. We just followed orders." I leaned closer, my shadow stretching over both of them. "And now you'll follow mine. You're going to confess. Every job, every lie, every dime Richard funneled through you. You're going to put it in writing. And if you don't..." I let the words trail, raising my hand to point toward the edge of the quarry, where the drop fell hundreds of feet into black nothingness. Well, let's just say nobody would miss two hired thugs. Kyle's eyes widened, his bravado shattered. You wouldn't. Torres gave a dry laugh. You don't know him like I do. Trust me, he would. The night air grew colder, the silence broken only by their ragged breathing. Finally, Brent cracked. His head sagged, his voice barely a whisper. Okay. I'll write whatever you want. Just don't kill us. I pulled a small notebook and pen from my jacket, tossing it at him. Then start writing. For the next 20 minutes, under the dim glow of a flashlight, they scribbled down everything. Names of other families they'd harassed, dates, payments. How Richard ordered the hits, how he skimmed off funds, how he controlled the board with fear. Every word was another nail in Richard's coffin. When they finished, I snatched the notebook and scanned it. Enough evidence to burn the whole rotten empire down. My hands trembled, not from rage this time, but from the realization that we were finally close to ending it. I looked at Brent and Kyle, broken and shaking in the dirt. For the first time, I saw them for what they really were, cowards. Men who only felt powerful when they were preying on the vulnerable. Here's what's going to happen, I said, standing tall. You're going to disappear. Leave this town, leave this state, and never show your faces here again. If I so much as hear your names whispered near my family, I'll finish what we started tonight. Torres cut their zip ties, and Ramirez yanked them to their feet. Brent's legs shook so badly he nearly collapsed. Kyle kept glancing at the edge of the quarry, his face pale as chalk. They didn't argue. They didn't threaten. They just nodded like chastised children and stumbled back toward the SUV, when Torres dropped them at the bus station an hour later. We made sure they had nothing but the clothes on their backs and empty wallets. Watching them board that midnight, Buzz, hunched and broken, was almost enough to ease the fire inside me. Almost, but Richard was still out there. And now I had proof-written confessions, recorded voices, bank statements. Everything we needed. When I slipped back into bed, just before dawn, Emily stirred. Her hand reached for mine, her voice groggy and soft. Are you okay? I kissed her forehead, my heart heavy but steady. We're closer than ever, just a little longer. Her fingers tightened around mine, and for the first time in days, she fell back into a deep sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing the final move was coming. Richard thought he was untouchable, but I was about to prove him wrong. The day the board meeting came, the air itself felt electric, heavy with the storm I'd been waiting to unleash. I stood outside the HOA headquarters with Emily's hand in mine. Her bruises faded, but the memory of them still sharp in my chest. Torres and Ramirez flanked us like shadows, silent and steady. And tucked inside my jacket was the notebook Brent. And Kyle's confessions, raw and damning, inside. The board sat polished and smug behind their long mahogany table, Richard at the center like a king on his throne. His expensive suit glimmered under the fluorescent lights, his smile sharp as a blade. Around him, the board members shuffled papers, barely glancing our way. They thought this was just another meeting, another chance for Richard to flex his power. But not today. When I stepped forward, silence followed. My voice was low at first, but it cut through the room. Before we begin, I want to make something clear. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to end this. Richard chuckled, leaning back in his chair. You think you can end me? You're just a homeowner, nothing more. This board controls the rules, and I control this board. I pulled the notebook from my jacket and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap, pages spilling open. Every board member leaned in, eyes narrowing at the words scrawled across the pages. I let the silence hang, then added, Your enforcers confessed. Every bribe, every assault, every crime you ordered. It's all there. Copies have already been sent to the sheriff's office, the district attorney, and every local news station. The smugness drained from Richard's face, replaced by a flicker of fear. He flipped through the pages with trembling fingers, his jaw tightening as the weight of the words hit him. "You're bluffing," he spat, but his voice lacked its usual venom. Torres stepped forward, a phone in his hand. He tapped play, and the room filled with the sound of Brent's voice, trembling and broken. "Richard paid us. He told us to scare them. He said no one would stand up to him. We didn't mean to hurt her. We were just following orders." The recording stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Board members shifted uneasily in their seats, their eyes darting between Richard and me. For the first time, the cracks in his armor were showing. Emily's voice rose, steady but laced with pain. "You sent men to our home. You hit me in front of my child. You broke into the one place where my family should have felt safe. Do you know what that did to my son? Do you know what it's like to watch him wake up screaming in the middle of the night, terrified that you'll come back?" Words pierced the room deeper than any evidence could. Even the coldest board members lowered their eyes. Richard, though, sat frozen, his face twisted with rage. "You think you've won," he hissed. "I have money, I have lawyers, you can't touch me." That was when the doors burst open. Uniformed deputies stormed inside, badges gleaming under the lights. The sheriff himself stepped forward, his voice booming. "Richard Lawson, you're under arrest for fraud, assault, extortion, and conspiracy." Gasps rippled through the room. Richard shot to his feet, sputtering. "This is a mistake." "You can't," but the sheriff cut him off, snapping cold steel cuffs around his wrists. "You've made enough mistakes." As they dragged him past me, Richard's eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, all I saw was fury, the kind that burned hot enough to destroy. But beneath it, there was something else: fear. For once, the man who had terrorized families, who had hidden behind money and power, finally understood what it felt like to be powerless. When the doors slammed shut behind him, the tension broke. The board erupted in whispers, some angry, some relieved, but I didn't care about them. I turned to Emily, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a true smile on her face. Outside, the morning sun bathed us in gold. Daniel ran up from where my mother had been watching him on the sidewalk, throwing himself into Emily's arms. She held him tight, tears streaming down her face. I crouched beside them, wrapping my arms around both, breathing them in. "It's over," I whispered, my voice cracking. "He can't hurt us anymore." Daniel looked up at me with wide eyes. "Did you beat the bad guys, Dad?" I smiled through the lump in my throat. "Yeah, buddy, we beat them." Torres clapped a hand on my shoulder, his voice low but steady. "You did more than beat them. You gave this whole neighborhood its freedom back." Ramirez nodded, his eyes soft. "Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't your fists, it's the truth." We walked home together, every step lighter than the last. Neighbors peeked from their windows, word already spreading. By the time we reached our street, people were outside, clapping, cheering quietly, as if afraid the spell might break. For so long, they'd been silent under Richard's thumb. But now, with him gone, their voices began to rise again. That night, when the house was quiet and Daniel finally slept without fear, Emily and I sat on the porch, holding hands under the stars. The world felt different, safer. Hours again, I kissed her hand, whispering he tried to take everything from us. But in the end, we're still here, stronger. She leaned against me, her voice soft. Together. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. The fight was over. Justice had been served, and the scars though deep, would heal.